Okay, I think we'll start.
Yep, sounds good. It's 3 o'clock, so let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, so this week we're going to, as I mentioned already, look at the BMAT results, and next week we are looking at what we're calling the Genius interview techniques. So some people have already had their Oxbridge and medical school, law school interview invitations. Please don't worry if you haven't yet. They are still coming out. It is quite normal for them still to be released, but they do like to give no more than a week's notice. So you are very lucky if you've been given more than that. So next week will be quite apt for those who have received their interviews. So admissions tests, we're going to go through the kind of the state the obvious moment. So the BMAT is the biomedical admissions test. It's required not only by Cambridge and Oxford, but also by a couple of other medical schools. It's a 2-hour written exam. This year it went back into pen and paper. The previous year it was diabolically digital. And it focuses on verbal and numerical reasoning, scientific knowledge, and an essay section, which is section 3. It's very different to the UCAT, as most of you and your students have probably found, for those who are with us now who have sat it and experienced it. And for those who are 2025 and 2025 entry, the BMAT Cambridge Assessments have confirmed that they will be running the BMAT for next year. So that's the final sitting of the BMAT next year with Cambridge Assessments, and then they will no longer be sitting it, no longer be running it. However, we strongly believe that it will continue, but that's not what we're here for today. So for those again who experienced it, section 1 is 30 minutes long. There are 32 questions. Each of them are multiple choice, 5 answer options. In section 2, it's another 30 minutes, 27 questions, and again, multiple choice. In section 3, you get 3 essay questions, and you pick one of those essays, and you are marked by your content and your English and grammar ability. So here we go. This is what Cambridge Assessments released with regards to the section 1 BMAT score. As you can see, this is a pretty nice bell curve. We'll go into this a little bit more in a moment. And this is the section 2 score. Again, quite a nice, not as large of a bell curve as this one. There's quite a steep up and then quite a steep down, but you can see that the majority are kind of grouped in to these median areas here. So I'm just going to bear one moment with me. I'm going to try and find, there we go. So this is what we believe is the middle mark. Does anybody, I wonder if we can do a little raise hand thing. Can we do a quick raise hands for those who received their grades, or their BMAT scores, sorry, but and sort of hit one of those middle marks? I don't see any.
Yeah, so there's a few.
Okay. And can you also click a little thing? So let's do one for section 1 and one for section 2.
So what's the question, Barbara? If you got in the middle of section 1.
So in the middle, yeah. So in the middle of section 1 and in the middle of sort of section 2. So let's do section 1 first, section 2 second. Okay. Right. Bear with me. Having some issues coming back onto the presentation.
I think one of the things to remember about it, whatever, you know, there's different people in different camps today. You know, there's people who are thrilled about the result. There's people who are a lot less thrilled, and, you know, there's people who are kind of, yeah, that's sort of what I expected. It's only part of the journey, you know, and yes, it is an important part, but it's not the end of an application. You know, there's still interviews to go, and, you know, a lot can happen in an interview. So wherever you are with it, just try and keep it in perspective. You know, if it's really high, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get in anywhere. If it's really low, it's not a guarantee you won't get in anywhere. And, you know, if it's in the middle, it's still not a guarantee. So it's important, of course it is, you know, we're not going to say it's not, but it's important to keep it in perspective wherever you are with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies. So if I go into my big PowerPoint, it just starts to crash. So I'm just going to show you. Everyone should still be able to see the slides. So we're revisiting section 1 and section 2. So as I mentioned already, there's quite a nice bell curve here in section 1, and this one kind of goes up quite rapidly and then comes back down. And so actually your median is sort of sits around here. Now, this graph here shows the scaled scores. So what we've done is we took the raw scoring, and then we scaled them. Now you can see here that actually this is really helpful because I can go to and from the slides. So you can see here that the scale scores back to sort of the real numbers shows that it's very similar in the scoring. So from here we'll be able to see where the majority of students sit. And again, same with this section 2 score. So here are the actual scores, and then here are the scales. So you can see it's pretty much mimicking itself. Now, we took the modal in section 1, and that is this lovely orange line here. And we believe that it is 4.1. Now, 4.1 sits us, so if everyone can see that that's the bar for 15 there, that's the 16 bar here. So we would have scored 16 out of the 32 marks that you could have attained. Now, if we go into section 2 scoring, you can see here that it was also sitting around 4.2. So we'll revisit the original graphs in a moment, but this would be median here. Sorry, the modal even. I'm just going to go back into this section. So you see again, there's a 4.1 and 4.4. So it would be this line here where you're sitting in 4.2. And again, 4.2 is this block here. Okay. So why does this data matter? It matters because we're now able to see, we're now able to see how UCL's last year's UCL's BMAT cutoff point was. So the orange is represents your average UCL applicant. The yellow represents those who were invited to interview, and the green represents those who gained offers at UCL. So just bear in mind that this is only for section 1. Section 1 scoring for Cambridge offer and the Oxford offer score. So Cambridge offer sits at 5.7 and the Oxford offer score sat at 5.9. Bear in mind that these are that these are last year's, and therefore it might change again this year. We don't have the Oxbridge cutoffs yet for this year, and they're not going to sort of give that data out until actually middle quarter 1 of next year. They don't tend to release it any earlier than March, April time. And so we won't actually know what the Oxbridge kind of general data is. Now, with UCL and some other medical schools, they have already released what their cutoff BMAT is, but not all of them will do that until the application process is complete. So please don't worry if you can't find that data anywhere, it's because they haven't released it. So that's why we're basing it on last year's data. I know there's lots of people asking questions, so we're just going to go through this. Now, for the last element, for those who might have questioned or asked questions about section 3. So section 3 is, as you know, an essay. And you can see here that the majority of students did fantastically in their quality of English, thank goodness. And they did, you know, they did relatively okay in the quality of the content. Now, section 1 and section 2 is very easy to mark, and it's very sort of similar. Section 3 is actually, as you are probably aware, read by an admissions tutor or read by multiple admissions tutors, and it's the human factor. And so whilst universities and medical schools do look at the scores and the data for section 3, it is not the be all and the end all, because they're also aware that every admissions tutor that reads a BMAT essay will read it slightly differently and might score it slightly differently as well. So it's really to sort of understand how does the student think, and it adds a little bit more kind of support and oomph into their section 1 and section 2, which is the basic and the basis and the most important elements of the BMAT. Harry, should we do questions now? Should we try to answer questions now or right at the end?
Yeah, we can answer a couple of questions now.
Okay.
So are we going to start the
yeah.
okay?
Let's go for it.
Okay. Can I get a scholarship through BMAT in the UK? Not entirely sure how to answer that question, but generally there aren't international scholarships available, certainly not through the BMAT. Can I get admission into Oxbridge for medicine if I do extremely well in BMAT but screw up my GCSEs? Well, maybe. It depends how badly they go. You know, medicine is very competitive. Oxbridge is very competitive anyway. It's going to be a hill to climb. It just depends what they are as to whether it's a completely impossible hill to climb or it's still possible. I mean, it will certainly weight things in your favor. But, you know, if there's a reason, I think the caveat to that is if there's a reason, you know, both Oxford and Cambridge and other universities do look reasonably on personal circumstances, be they health, familial or other, affecting a student's work. So, you know, there is some room there. Okay. What was the midpoint for section 2 again, Barbara?
Oh, okay, let's revisit section 2. I'm glad actually that I put it like this because it's so much easier to squiggle around. Okay, so your section 2. So here is your medium. What we're gonna call it modal. So it's 4.2 or 11 out of 27. Your section 1 is 4.1 or 16 out of 32. The important element here is to remember that this is what it took to get into UCL last year. So you really need to be scoring in the middle to the high 5s. And again, same with Oxbridge. You can see here, middle to the high 5s. Now, this data is really important that we highlight this. This data doesn't take into account any of your contextual data. It doesn't take into account your GCSEs. It doesn't take into account your UCAS. It doesn't take into account your predicted grades. It doesn't take into account which college, which university you have applied for, and it doesn't take into account any of your contextual data if you have that. It's very much, yes, the admissions test is vital, but also you must remember that the admissions tutors will be looking at your score in context of all of the other data that they have collected around you as an applicant, which is why you will find that there are some applicants who are offered a place after interview or are offered interview at a slightly different score range than others, and that's just simply because of the data that they have. But generally saying even the 2019 scores were at the 5.7, 5.9 range for Oxford and Cambridge. So it hasn't really shifted massively year on year. Now, obviously, we don't have this year's because they're not going to release that yet. But if you look at year on year, it doesn't really shift much.
Yeah. But I think the other thing to remember is these are just averages as well, right? So there's people significantly below these who did still get offers, right? So it's not like if I don't get 5.7, that's it. Just can't happen. You know, there's a distribution curve on this as well, which also looks something like a bell curve, you know, which is peaking at the top of the bell around these averages. So yeah, because it's very easy to look at that and just think, you know, I didn't get 5.7, that's it. It's not going to happen, and it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So please try not to, it's very good to have this data, and it's fantastic to be able to look at it on an average of all people sitting the BMAT this year and what it took from data, you know, what it took for applicants on another particular year in the past to get in. But it doesn't mean that you are there. I didn't score 5.9, therefore I'm doomed for failure. That's absolutely not the case. Should we answer some more questions?
Yeah, so will the 6.4 be enough to get an interview for UCL and Cambridge? I think it just moved off my screen.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm just going to tick some of them off.
Okay, no worries. Every time you tick one, they so the short answer is probably. So again, you know, it's not a short answer. Nothing's ever a short answer, unfortunately, in this process. It depends on everything else, right? You know, this is not get a 5.5 or 5.9 or whatever, and you will get an interview. Assuming everything else sits and lines up, then yes, 6.4, I think you said, should be fine to get an interview for UCL and Cambridge. Yes, but I would say just in the context of everything else, yeah, if you look back at here, so this is UCL last year. So applied, interviews and offers. So yeah, you know, you're even over the offer typical average, but again, it's no guarantee either. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. A midpoint, we've done that one. So 6.4 is enough. We've just answered that. Okay, what happens if you bombed your BMAT section 2 and got a 4.2? All right, so let's visit section 2 again, shall we? So here is your section 2 in raw. So you can see that actually 4.2 is your modal score. So whilst it might not be in the upper numbers, so let's just visit this one. Is this one I want? Yeah. Nope. Apologies, I want this one. So here is your modal, here's 4.2. So, okay, you may not have reached your 5s and your 4.7s, but that's not to mean, as in, I don't know which medical schools you have applied to, but I can probably quite safely, I would be happy to safely say that there will be medical schools who will consider you at 4.2 in section 2. I also don't know what your 4.1 score was, so it's a little difficult to sort of get an idea of that, but you can see here as well. So UCL would be sat here, but there will be other medical schools who will take from the modal onwards as well. If you are very worried, we would recommend speaking to the medical school and just asking if they know what their sort of cutoff point is. But again, like we mentioned earlier, don't worry about it. Don't just, you know, just give up on your application, because you have a whole other set of data around your application that they will consider. Harry, do you want to do one?
Yeah. So it's 5.9 in section 1 and 5.7 in section 2, competitive BMAT score as an international applicant to Oxford for biomedical sciences. So if we go back to the Oxford and Cambridge slide again.
Coming.
Yeah, I mean, you can see you're up there. These are also all BMAT. So biomedical sciences score is going to be a little bit less than the typical medical scores. So yes, on the face of it, yes, that does put you in the running. I think what counts against you is you're an international applicant, and it's harder for international applicants because there's a limited number of places and you're competing with people from all over the world. But you're definitely still in the running. Yeah. You know, there's nothing there that says, you know, oh, that's it, forget about it by any means. So yeah, good on, keep your head down and focus on the interviews. And, you know, that's the general message wherever you are, because whether it was great, it was okay, or not what you hoped for, you're on this path now. You know, there's no taking the UCAS application back in and doing another one, or, you know, you are where you are. And the thing that's going to save you, if you need saving, or get you over the line, if you feel like you're in a good place, is your interview performance. So it's still all to play for. Yeah,
absolutely. Good point, Harry, that, you know, don't throw your hat into the ring until you get that letter of rejection or interview invite. And when you get your interview invite, that is it. That is your last chance saloon to show yourself as an applicant and prove yourself. So, you know, if you know that, okay, my scoring wasn't quite where it needed to be, but somehow, you know, they've invited me because they obviously see me as a good applicant, as an applicant that's good enough to interview, then, you know, don't hesitate. Put everything into that interview. Okay, will 5.2, 5.7 and 3A get an interview for dentistry at Leeds? Good question, Rinalza. So we don't have the Leeds dentistry data as of yet, but again, if we were to go back into UCL, you can see here, if we take the UCL off, for example, last year was 5.4, you have achieved those numbers in your sitting, so 5.2, 5.7, 3A. So you should be relatively comfortable and confident in getting an interview. Again, you know, we don't know what all dentistry Leeds applicants scored in their BMAT this year. They might be sat in this higher echelon, or they might be sat in the modal. So again, this is all, you know, data. Don't forget, guys, this is an average across all people who sat the BMAT this year. Okay, can we see that Oxford and Cambridge offer holders for section 2 and the Imperial ones for section 1 and 2? So I don't have, I wish I had it, but I don't have it, unfortunately, for section 2, and Imperial, I don't believe, have released their data yet. But if you drop us an email to info@uniadmissions.co.uk, we'll pop that in the chat for you with that question, then we can dig out and some information and see what we can get for you. So if you have kind of more specific information, requesting more specific information, such as that request, we can look into it for you. We might have that data or be able to get it for you. Just drop us an email. Eunice, how about UCL and Oxford's cutoff for international students? Harry, do you want to take that one?
So I don't think they specify a strict international cutoff, do they? So yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't think they specify one. So you know, they look at these things holistically, as we've said. So, you know, if it's weaker than you'd hoped, but you've got strength in other areas, you know, they will consider that. So yeah, that's all we can say about that one, really, I'm afraid.
Okay, good question here. How are you able to let them know of any circumstances that affect one's studies? So there are two ways to do this. If you are impacted on the day or the days leading up to your BMAT, so that has already passed, there is a very short deadline post BMAT taking that that they open up a window where you can inform them of mitigating circumstances. Those mitigating circumstances do usually need to have a medical note attached to them if it's medical, or some sort of perhaps teacher sign off, or anything else that it might be related to. The majority of the times it is medical related, so illnesses, etc., etc. In which case you do have a very short period of time, I believe it's 5 days off the top of my head, where you can put that in. If you are not able to sit the BMAT because of extenuating circumstances, then you need to get in touch with CAAT, and then they make possible arrangements. So there are various ways. Now, if you have extenuating circumstances beyond the BMAT, you need to inform the university admissions team or the Oxbridge College that you are applying to about those circumstances. So you just need to email them directly, again, with as much information as possible. So somebody just saying, oh, I had a cold a week before the BMAT isn't going to sit nice. But if you say, okay, I had COVID and here's a test positive and my doctor's sign off, then it's something that they can, they will certainly take into consideration when they're looking at your scores and your application. Obviously, we are aware that there are students who have, longer periods of circumstances that they have to focus on, and that sort of sets them back or challenges them in addition to their application process. And it's vital that you just send that information through directly to the admissions team. Whereabouts? Is it possible to do a medicine course completely free in Cambridge or Oxford? Yes, so there are grants and bursaries and scholarships that the university and colleges grant. They are, of course, very competitive. There are lots of different ones, from musical to sports to academic to contextual. So you would need to look at all of the scholarships and the grants that are available and apply to them as an individual student.
And they are basically all UK based or aimed at, granted to, and they're mostly also not a total scholarship. They are 20% off this or X £1,000 per year on this. So is it theoretically possible for someone to go through completely free? Maybe. I'm not even sure if it is theoretically. You would have to take on debt and stuff, but these, again, it's all UK based. If you're international, unfortunately you have to pay for it pretty much in full. If you're UK based, you still probably, I can't see you going through completely free. I could see you going through taking on various debts, which, hopefully I'm sure you'd be able to pay back as a result of doing medicine in Cambridge. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Okay, Mandy, my daughter didn't score as good in section 1 as she expected. Can she get her section 1 remarked? 2.8 score. What are her chances of getting into BMAT uni, not in London? Okay, so if there is a 2.8 score, we would advise on getting it remarked. It's a relatively good idea to do it. Just be advised, if you are thinking of remarking, exactly like with A-levels or any other test that students sit, if you ask it to be remarked, it can go down as well as up. There, off the top of my head, I don't know which universities have decided what their BMAT cutoff scores are. But if she's absolutely desperate to go to medical school, I would perhaps get in touch with Buckingham Medical School, who are a private medical school, and you can also, of course, reapply for next year and resit the BMAT next year, and just have that conversation. So again, remember that everything is in context. Her application is seen as a whole. And this is one section of that. So she might have got a 2.8 in section 1. Again, I don't know what her section 2 score was, and the contextual data within her application as well. So all of that has an impact.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things, just in passing, is the IMAT and the Italian medical school option. So the IMAT you take in September for October that year. So term starts in October, you take the exam in September. So obviously very different to our system where it's a year in advance. It's in Italy, but it's all taught in English. It's also very good value. Term fees are actually, in the hundreds or maybe low thousands, compared to many multiples of that in the UK and elsewhere. So it's fairly competitive, again, like pretty much everything medicine related, but it's a good thing if you're on a timetable, as it were. You don't want to take a year out. You can literally just take it in September next year and start in October, whereas had you got the BMAT score you wanted to right now, you wouldn't be starting until September next year anyway. So it's an option. And actually, spending a few years in Florence or, Turin or Milan, there's worse places to spend time, I think. So, okay. So next question, can I fail at Oxbridge? I would say yes. I'm not entirely sure what the question means, but yes is probably the answer.
Yep,
and lots of people do. Before they get there and when they get there. So, yeah. Exactly. If you get lower in the BMAT than the majority of applicants for Oxbridge, do you have to score higher in the interview if all other things are equal? Yes, I would say yes, but all other things are never equal because everyone is a unique applicant, and even if you have the same grades as person X next to you and, you're going to have gone to a different school, right? And they weight the schools. So everything is never equal. And so, but as a general rule, yes, it is true that the worse your BMAT score is, the bigger hill you have to climb, and the better it is, the lesser hill you have to climb. But, you can throw away a great BMAT score with a bad interview. Don't get me wrong, and if you look at the distribution, there are people who get really great scores who, you can't really see it on that particular one. We don't have a graph of this particular thing, but there are people who get really great scores, not just for BMAT, but across all the tests, who still don't get in. And there's people that get pretty rubbish scores who do get in. So, there's just a lot more to it, is all I'd say. I mean, we say typically admissions test 40%, interview 40%, personal statement 10%, and academic background 10%. So if you think about it, within the 40% that's BMAT, a swing of 20% within 40% is not actually that much of an overall application. So, okay. With regards to Cambridge, you mentioned that they often give no more than 1 week notice before the interview. Does that mean that they do not send all the interview invites together, but may instead send them based on availability of interview slots? Well, the interviews are coming from the colleges, so they're all going to be going out at different times, right? So, so although there is some coherence and they try to do all the medical interviews around a certain period, they are coming from different places. So yes, they don't all come out at the same time.
No, I actually saw an email a lovely student of ours sent their forwarded me and Joy their interview invite to Cambridge last night, and what they had written in there was that they haven't confirmed the precise date and the time, but it's going to be between a couple of days. And actually quite a few students of ours who have received their interview invites have received a similar sort of email saying, oh, it's going to be between this day and this day, but we will confirm nearer to the time. And they said that that's because of certain staffing constraints. So for those who are in the UK, you may be aware that there are some union disputes going on, but there's also teaching at the same time, and all of that. So all of that kind of compiled together. So you don't be surprised if you do get a kind of in between date slot, not necessarily a date and time. For when you get a date and a time and you're not able to make it, please don't feel, just get in touch with them as soon as possible and let them know on what that reason is. But yes, they don't normally give any more than a week. But yeah, just bear in mind that there have been a couple of emails that are like that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Barbara. And we're joined by our esteemed founder, Dr. Rohan Agrawal. So thank you, Rohan. Good to see you.
Hi, guys. Looks like you've been doing lots of good work. So not sure I'll be able to add much, but I'm happy to take questions if necessary.
We've put it into this because my presentation was my PowerPoint was crashing, but also we found it easier to switch between the slides. So that's why it's like this, for everyone to be able to just manipulate data very quickly. So apologies. Steve Chan, we focused on section 1. What about the influences of section 2 and section 3? So as I mentioned with section 3 earlier, just remember that it is marked by admissions tutors, and every admissions tutor will read an essay. As with every human being, will read an essay or a piece of writing in a very different way, and will probably mark it slightly differently as well. So the BMAT 3 does obviously has some influence, but it's not as much of an influence as per section 1 and section 2, because that's the fair playing ground, that's the fair leveling playing ground of all the sort of the 3 sections of the BMAT. Section 2, we don't have that data yet, but again, if you reach out to us through email, which is info@uniadmissions.co.uk, and just ask us, we will extrapolate and get as much information to you as we possibly can, if anything's sort of missing from this area.
As a rough generalization, section 2 is generally weighted the same as section 1 by most universities. Some colleges at Cambridge and a couple at Oxford will weight section 2 slightly more favorably than section 1, but generally it's pretty much the same. Section 3 tends to be less favored, so Oxford will typically do 40-40-20, Cambridge will typically do 50-50, and they'll kind of just ignore section 3, which may come up in your interviews, for instance. But broadly, we kind of say section 1 and 2 are roughly equal.
Thank you, Rohan. Is the webinar recorded? Yes, it is. And if you have registered, you will receive a recording. What will happen if you have a top 1% in the world score for the first 2 sections, but horribly mess up section 3? So I think we've kind of answered that.
Yeah, I think it depends what you mean by horribly mess up. I mean, if you've said something that's incompatible with being a medical doctor, such as euthanasia should be legalized everywhere, and you've not shown a balanced perspective, or even more contentious, shown a complete disregard of medical ethics, and I think that would raise some questions. It's not uncommon for admissions tutors to not even read section 3. Now, if someone has scored like an E or an X for their quality of English and a 0 or 1 for their strength of argument, then that would probably be quite a big red flag, but that would generally be incongruous with getting a top score in section 1, which tends to require quite a good command of English anyway. And as Harry alluded to earlier, we've had students, in fact, we had one student last year who got 2 8s and a reasonable middle ground score in section 3 and didn't get a place. And we also had a student who got 4s who then went on to get a place at Cambridge. So it's important, but it's not the be all and end all.
Thank you. Do you feel a 5.1 and a 5.7 is enough this year for UCL and Imperial? So I'm going to revisit this chart here for UCL's last year. So if you scored 5.7, 5.4, and if we base it on last year's scoring offer was generally at 5.4, 5.5, then I'm looking at the data for this year, you should be relatively safe. But again, we keep going back to this. It's your application as a whole that matters. So you should hopefully be invited to interview. Make sure that you prepare for that interview. It's vital.
Yeah.
That is your last chance saloon to really sort of show yourself and introduce yourself as a person, because right now you are statistics and figures and one sheet of paper as per your UCAS personal statement. So
yeah, just to add on to that, the general feeling amongst, having looked at not just the feedback from the students, but from if you look at the score distribution, It's actually very similar to the score distribution from 2020, which is a couple of years ago. Based in 2020, the kind of distribution, the cutoff for UCL was 4.3 for the average applicant applying to UCL. But actually the ones that got interviewed was 5.2. And then for section, so this is section 1, and then section 2 was 4.8. So 5.1, just slightly under that 5.2, but 5.7 is well above the 4.8. So you kind of be in the cusp. I think with those scores, you should be okay for UCL. Imperial change their scores quite a lot every year, so it's quite difficult to say. But generally what we say is 2 5s should guarantee, assuming you've got a decent section 3 score, should at least put you in place for an interview at least UCL and potentially Imperial as well. As we talked about, Cambridge will interview the majority of applicants anyway.
Yeah, I just have to add really quickly, kind of from my own observations, that Imperial has increasingly become more competitive across like year on year. I think this year is probably the most competitive I've seen it, so just be wary of that. Anonymous attendee, is there an official cutoff for Oxford for each section? I.e. if one section was slightly below said cutoff score while other sections scored higher than average overall percentage score, what would that mean that I'm not able to achieve an interview shortlist place?
The way Oxford traditionally do this is they'll use a combination of a percentage of your grades and GCSE that are 8 or 9s, and then on top of that they'll combine that with your BMAT score, and then essentially what they'll do is say, okay, your GCSE results put you in the top, in the 95th percentile, and your BMAT results puts you in the top 80th percentile, for instance. And then essentially it's just an algorithm which weights, and we end up with a weighted average, and they take the top 30% of people and then invite them through. They've not made it clear how they're actually going to process, given that most people's GCSEs are going to be predicted. They've not actually made it clear how they're going to process those as a result. What we assume they're going to do is ignore the GCSEs, in which case it would just come down to BMAT. And if you look at that curve there, if we assume they're going to take the top 30% of individuals, just very briefly.
Which one would you like?
This one's fine. I'm just trying to work out where 30% would be. So it'd probably be closer to that light blue bar, I suspect, that 5.7. I'd say if you're below that, then it's going to be quite a stretch to get an interview from Oxford. Now, that doesn't mean if you're applying from a particularly underfunded state school or with extenuating circumstances, they may lower that threshold for you. And similarly for students applying from particularly well-off private schools that tend to send lots of students to Oxford every year, they may raise that threshold, but I'd say probably around that 5.7 mark is a safe bet for both sections. Sorry, for section 1, I'm not got the section 2 data.
No, but we will get it. Are the BMAT cutoffs expected to be lower this year due to the bell curve being shifted slightly to the right for the first 2 sections? No, I would expect them to be higher this year. So let's revisit the bell curves. So this is our section 1 bell curve and our section 2 bell curve.
Yeah, there's a slight skew in there. I think, maybe they'll drop it by a tier. So instead of 5.7, it may be 5.5. I don't see it being significantly different. We all wish that it was, but every year, we do this every year, and every year students find the BMAT challenging. It's meant to be challenging as a result. I think this year was quite challenging because of the way the maths questions in particular were constructed, but I wouldn't expect or anticipate a significant change, unfortunately. Maybe a tier or 2, nothing more than that.
International applicants, what will the data be like? So we've covered this one already. We don't actually have that data isn't provided until post entry, so sort of everything is done. They don't tend to release it until April next year at the very earliest, and then we can kind of look at that data, but they don't release it readily, and it's not very openly available. So
what we tend to say in UniAdmissions is generally if you add on a 1 to both your section 1 and 2 scores, so if the cutoff is say 5.7 at UCL, you can normally add on a 1 to that, so it becomes a 6.7, for instance, for international. It seems quite high, and it is, but it has to be because as international applicants, you are unfortunately competing with the rest of the world. It's the same thing at Cambridge. Cambridge tends to be a lot more lenient with the BMAT. They do value it, but if you have a particularly stellar interview performance, they'll kind of overlook the BMAT to a certain extent, whereas Oxford are pretty ruthless about it. They won't even interview you without a good BMAT score. And a good BMAT score in Oxford is you're approaching the sevens territory for an interview for an international applicant.
Sinoni, is the statistic for graduate entry medicine in Oxford the same as the undergraduate? In short, no.
Yeah. Graduate entry tends to be a lot more competitive. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but what we normally quote is, you have about a 20 to 30% chance of getting into any medical school. For undergraduate entry, it tends to be about 2 to 8% for graduate entry. So it's a lot less. There's a lot more applicants and there's less spaces.
Hi again. How many total students gave BMAT? Do we know the number? Also, do we know how many students fall in 5.7 or 5.9 or 6.0, for example? No, we don't know the exact number of students who sat.
It won't get released until much later in the year, at which point you probably won't care, to be honest. Generally, historically, it tended to be about 10,000 people. I think last year was a bit higher, about 13 to 15,000. We never get the exact data because then it's never really released in that granular detail, but it's about 15,000. If you look at this distribution curve, you can see, for instance, if your question was what percentage get above 5.7, well, if you just kind of add up this could actually be a very easy UCAT question. If you just add up the histograms, so if we just hover over 5.7, you'll see that that's about 5%. And then you kind of add up every bar there. So 5.9 is about 4.5, that brings you to 9.5, and you kind of go along that, do that exercise. As a very rough glance, I'd probably say that's about 20%. So about, if you're getting 5.7 or above, you're in the 80th percentile. Again, very quick maths. I'm not kind of gone through that.
Yeah. But we don't get the raw numbers until much later. The red yellow line, so this one, the orange one here, 4.5 bar, is UCL's average applicants. So those who applied to UCL for medicine and sat the BMAT scored 4.5. The average interview, so those who were invited to interview and applied to UCL and sat the BMAT, was 4.8, and those who gained offers was 5. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Was 5.4. Gosh, I'm moving things all over the place. So that's what those 3 bars mean. I hope that helps. Okay. Can you tell me from this data if the grade boundaries were higher or lower than last year? No, because we don't have the grade boundaries for this year yet.
Yeah, if you're kind of asking us to hypothesize on grade boundaries, I think they will be lower this year. There were multiple reasons why the grade boundaries were so high last year. Obviously there was online testing. There was the fact that some students couldn't actually sit the test. Then there was some rumors, which we won't go into, about online test questions being leaked and things. Given that it's all been on paper and it was a more challenging test this year than last year, we'd anticipate them being a touch lower.
Yeah. Good question. Where did we find this data? Oh, sorry. Yeah, where did we find this data? So we digest a lot of data for our students. We digest it through lots and lots of contextual data and all the data that's released year on year by the universities after the circuit of that entry application year is being completed. We also speak to universities and colleges, and we also ask for a lot of freedom of information requests. They tend to send a lot of data, and it takes us many, many hours to kind of digest that and put it into something that that is understandable, digestible, and and useful as well.
If you're asking about where we got these exact graphs, they're actually released to every single applicant who takes the BMAT. So page 1 will have your results, and then page 2 actually has all these graphs in it. Or we've just added some lines to make it a bit more understandable.
Okay. Other BMAT cutoffs, we already done that one. Please, can you repeat the percentage across requirement? Percentage across what?
Okay. I think perhaps you mean the the 40-40-20.
Oh yeah,
Or
possibly.
section
Oh,
1,
you mean
section
that?
2, section 3, or
Yeah.
50-50. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking. Okay, so or not the other. Okay, so Rohan was saying that the weighting for Oxford is 40-40-20 between section 1, 2, and 3, and for Cambridge it's 50-50, and they don't really look at section 3.
Yeah,
I would say
with a caveat that obviously you may come up in your interview as a discussion point. Yeah,
I was saying before that the weighting across an application is typically 40% admissions test, 40% interview, 10% personal statement, and 10% existing academic background. So I'm not sure which of those two you were looking for, but hopefully it was one of them. Okay, will you be will you be disadvantaged if you have to ask Cambridge to change the interview date for a genuine reason, like clash with another interview because of the inconvenience? No, I would say no, as long as it is a genuine reason. The person doing the interview probably won't have even realized why it's been changed or that it needed to be changed. They're just going to be like, oh, this is person X, you know, they're not going to be doing the scheduling themselves. Okay. I'll do this one because I like this one. Okay, how is the acceptance rate? I know I'm on a roll now, Barbara. How is the acceptance rate for classics so high for Cambridge and so low for all other courses? Okay, so I did archaeology and anthropology at Oxford, so it's not classics, and the acceptance rate is also not particularly high, but it just varies course to course. You know, I mean, the acceptance rate for medicine is quite high compared to economics and management or maths and statistics. So, you know, it depends how big the faculty is. How big the faculty is depends how big the department is. And how many people do the subject. So certain subjects like music's 51% success rate at Oxford, classics shortly behind that. The truth is there's not very many people who are really high-level musicians or high-level classicists. Classics is also not studied as widely. It's not a very kind of, well, it's perceived to not be a very exciting subject. It's certainly not a fashionable subject. You know, its career options are not as wide as some other subjects. So, you know, there's a whole load of reasons. And, you know, classics is at one end, things like maths and statistics, economics and management at the other end. And, you know, there's many, many shades of grey in between. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to try your hand at classics, you know, if you love classics, it's fantastic because it's, you know, at the end of the day, you come out with an Oxford or a Cambridge degree. A lot of the time, people are not that interested. Certainly once you have a job and, you know, have moved on, you know, what exactly it was in, unless obviously, I know this is a medical one, but taking it off there, obviously, if you want to be a doctor, it's a bit of a different story. But okay, I hope that was helpful. So why do you think the BMAT cutoffs will not be lower when last year people cheated, it was online, and it was easier?
I said that. I said they'll be lower this year. So maybe there's just been a misunderstanding. So they will be lower this year. Not significantly, but they will be lower.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to keep bringing them in. So Harry is going to talk about how we as UniAdmissions can help you, your students, and students and yourselves, if you have students today, with their Oxbridge application, and how it is that we support you across the year. So take it away, Harry.
Thank you, Barbara. So I'll talk about this in a kind of broad brush strokes because, you know, I'm talking to people who are at very different stages. You know, some of you are just waiting for interview. Others of you are looking for next year or the year beyond. So in the short term right now, you know, our focus is just purely on getting people that we're working with and people who would like to work with us over the line, getting their interview performance to the best it possibly can be in the time remaining. You can make dramatic improvements in your interview performance. It's like it's like practicing anything. You do get better at it. And it's not just simply practicing it, it's preparing for it, it's doing skills work, it's seeing other people, your peers, that go through processes and observing it. You know, there's lots that you can do. You still have time. Obviously, Oxford and Cambridge, the time's relatively short, but there is still absolutely time. Other medical schools, obviously, you have a bit more time for next year. So, you know, but one thing I would say is wherever you are in this process, there isn't time to waste. And, you know, we see a very clear line between when people start preparing and how successful they are, both for interview and in general. And so, you know, and there's nothing particularly surprising about that, is there? You know, the more well organized and the more you put into a process, the more likely you are to come out of it successfully. So what that looks like in the short term in terms of interviews is we do interview preparation sessions, we do mock interviews. People think mock interviews are preparing for interview. Actually, mock interviews are the kind of icing on the cake. They're what you do at the end of a process. They're kind of like, you know, the test at the end of the year. It's important, but it's not actually interview preparation. But it is important. You do those at the end of the interview preparation, get some feedback, implement it, do more mocks, do more interview preparation sessions. You might not think there's a lot of time for that, but, you know, typically at this point, we're working with people doing 4 interview preparation sessions, 4 mock interviews. And we also have our interview course. So we've done 2 or 3 already, including one this weekend. They've all been sold out, and we have some places left for our final one next weekend. For some subjects, they're not all available. So, you know, that's a whole weekend of intensive. So that's what we do in the short term. Over a long period of time, you know, we obviously have more capacity to sculpt a student to help them improve. And so, you know, that looks like individual one-on-one work with one of our expert tutors. It looks like seminars. We have weekly seminars across different disciplines, which really help get you up to speed. You know, these are built on the Oxford and Cambridge tutorial system. They're designed to get you engaged, get you thinking. And then when you come to interview, having been through a lot of these seminars, it feels very natural for you to explore topics in depth because you've been doing it over a long period of time. We do intensive courses for everything: BMAT, UCAT, TSA, LNAT, interviews, personal statement, you name it. So we roll those in as part of it. And we also have an online portal which contains all of our resources. We've written about 120 books on this process. So, you know, the old expression, like, he wrote the book on it. Well, we really have written all the books on it. So, yeah, if you think that would be useful for you, you know, we'd love to explore that with you and have the conversation. And so, yeah, please feel free to get in touch. You can get in touch with me directly. My email is harry@uniadmissions.co.uk. Again, that's just harry@uniadmissions.co.uk. Or you can just email our general email, info@uniadmissions, and that will take you into our system. Okay. And was there anything else that you just wanted to add, Rohan?
No, I think the major thing is we've already covered, which is your BMAT score doesn't define you. A bad score doesn't mean the end of your university journey. Similarly, a good score doesn't guarantee your place. You know, the interview really is the last hurdle, so make sure you prepare for it. Don't fall into the trap that you can't prepare for them. You know, the biggest mistake students make is they try and wing these, and then it goes terribly. Interviews are like an exam, just like the BMAT, and like any exam, they can and should be prepared for. So all the best. If for those of you who haven't heard from Cambridge and Oxford, you should be hearing in the next week. Cambridge have been sending out interview invites even as late as, well, a few hours ago. So, and you know, I had one student who got an offer for an interview on Tuesday, who found out this morning. So they're really leaving it to quite last minute. So do start preparing ASAP if you haven't already done so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we always say is don't wait. You know, this is a really competitive process. I know we said it before. You can't game it totally. You know, there's no way to sort of trick your way in, but you can stack the odds in your favor by hard work and careful preparation. And if you, with regards to interviews, you have time now to do that. If you wait until you get notified, you probably aren't going to have time. And if you have time, it's going to be a very small window of time. So throw everything at it, give it your best, and, you know, hopefully things will go well.
Yeah, and, you know, just to add on that, when we were doing these 2 or 3 years ago, we used to say that they'll give 7 to 10 days notice. We've seen that shrinking massively post-COVID, simply because before you had to, you know, arrange your school meal, you had to, your college meal, you had to arrange an accommodation, you had to give you the option to travel up, sort out the finances. Now it's all online. Sometimes you're giving 72 hours notice, as we've seen, because it's just, you know, you log on to the computer, right? It's much easier and much quicker and much more convenient for them. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Rohan, and thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you very much to everyone who's joined us here today. So we will wish you an excellent rest of your weekend, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.